I'm Camille Saltman. I'm the Managing Director of Entrepreneurship at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan campus, and I'm here with Michael McCauley.
And I'm Michael McCauley, partner with the law firm of Lawson Lundell here in our Kelowna office.
To start with, we're heading to West Kelowna to join Grouse Barnes for the First Nations acknowledgement.
Welcome to beautiful Seal territory. You know, all the things that you see here, all the water. My people have been here since time began, since time immemorial. I'm very happy to welcome you to our land. The sustainability of our land is bountiful. The water is sacred, water is life. Water comes from the highest mountain, from the Squilquelt. And it starts out as a raindrop. It starts out as a little trickle on the land, and it comes down from the highest place on mountain tops, and it ends up in the lake here. Water so humble that it's life giver. Without water, we wouldn't be here. Without water, nothing would be alive. The word for water. The word for water in the Seal language is siulk. You know, I can't see you guys, but give her a shot. Siulk. When you break that down, it breaks down in two pieces. The first part is siust, human siust. The last part of the word is siulk. Animals lap the water. So when you put that together, it's humans and animals together. It's not humans first and animals get whatever's left.
So let's dive in and look at state-of-the-art projects that can protect our region from flooding.
We're also going to learn why the natural assets approach is far less expensive than funding major infrastructure projects and how it can be used to improve the livability of our cities for both residents and for tourists.
To start with, let's join Emmanuel Machado, City Manager of the City of Gibsons, and Alison Shaw, CEO of Flipside Sustainability. They will introduce us to how communities like Gibsons place a value on and utilize natural assets.
I work with a team of professionals who ensures that the drinking water, the treatment, the wastewater treatment, green space, the roads that we travel on, those are probably our primary focus areas. This is Georgia Beach, so that's an example of a natural foreshore. It's something we could never replicate. And from a public infrastructure perspective, ideally this is what we would have throughout the whole foreshore. And unfortunately, over the years, we've, for a variety of reasons, have had to build infrastructure really too close to the ocean and have then added retaining walls in particular that have contributed to the loss of the environmental benefits to fish habitat, and from a protection perspective do a very, very good job, and they cost a fraction of in comparison to building an engineered type wall. The town of Gibsons over the last year has led an initiative called Eco Assets, which is recognizing the role of nature in municipal infrastructure service like stormwater management or water filtration, water storage. And in this case, it's the foreshore itself protects us from the wave action and protects public infrastructure.
What if we flipped our perspective and understood natural assets as critical features of our communities, as features that enhance and advance community protection, safety, and resilience over time? And we saw the forests as the lungs and the rivers and streams as the kidneys in a functioning system that builds overall health and well-being for communities and the other species that we share these systems with. Could you talk a bit about how natural assets can be deployed to manage flood risk and reduce the kind of economic damage that we're starting to see rising?
Certainly, and in fact, there was a strong motivation for the town of Gibsons when we started. In essence, we started with a question. We wanted to understand how dependent are we as a community on nature to continue to provide the services that we have until now, consider the impacts of climate change. And not surprisingly, the answer for us has been that we're not just really dependent, but we're totally dependent on nature to continue to provide services to our residents. And so we're relying on nature to provide us those services. What is the level of service and the level of risk that we're prepared to accept? And that was our entry point. Speaking with our auditors in that case, we started by asking those types of questions around our water system, the aquifer. What if there was something to happen to that asset? Did we have the financial plan in place to respond to that disaster? And of course, I don't know that we would have that kind of money. There's also still within risk, the motivation was around understanding our exposure in terms of floods. And Gibsons had a history of floods in the 70s and 80s. And we have now understand that if we keep increasing and restoring our natural areas, that we've been reducing our incidents of flooding in Lower Gibsons, and we'll continue to do that. And also trying to understand from a business interruption or property loss or those types of events, that is a strong motivation for us to do the work we've been doing. The Insurance Bureau of Canada has some advice and some decent rule of thumb for communities to think about. In essence, what they're saying is keep the natural assets that you have, restore what you have lost, and build only what you must.
How does the town of Gibsons value those assets?
Evaluation is a process in the case of the Natural Assets Initiative that relies on the condition of the asset, identify the capacity of the asset to provide services, and also have an understanding about the value of those services from a cost perspective and replacement perspective, if that's the case. And more importantly, we get some understanding about the condition in terms of whether we need to do any restoration work and improvements to our approach in terms of maintenance and operations as well.
And just to come back to the concept of replacement approach.
Once our policy was adopted, we now had direction to consider a natural alternative, in this particular case at a time of capital work. So we had on our books a project to replace a stormwater system and expand that system to convey rainwater from Upper Gibsons to Lower Gibsons, and we had projected that assets to cost in the neighborhood of $4.5 million. Now with the ability to do evaluation and a nearby natural asset that we could improve, we're able to demonstrate to council in this case that by improving the natural area, cost-wise, we could get not just the same service, but an even higher service capacity for about 25 cents on the dollar. The operational costs, for example, were substantially lower. One of the advantages of natural assets is that they have no upfront costs other than just sort of the improvements in this case. There's no replacement cost if you maintain it properly, and there's no depreciation also. That understanding led to substantial changes in our plans because in that case, it was related to our development cost charges by law. And so we were able to reduce the costs to the development community in this case by close to 75%. And we're now in a position to collect fees for the restoration and improvement of a natural area. And it's an example of what restorative development can look like. Subsequently, we changed our financial plan, we changed our subdivision and standards, our parks maintenance plans, our stormwater management plan, and we're now motivated to complete evaluations similarly for the remaining classes of assets as well.
It's so exciting to see what's possible. Utilizing natural assets versus rebuilding aging infrastructure creates a beautifully livable city, and it means lower taxes.
Absolutely.
Let's now move to Kingsman Park, where David Saltman, chair of the Okanagan Sustainability Leadership Council, is going to interview Anna Warwick-Sears. She's chair of the Okanagan Basin Water Board, and also Tessa Turbasket, who's with the Natural Resource Department of the Okanagan Nation Alliance.
That's great. OBWB and the ONA are really getting a handle on this, where this region is vulnerable, so that we can get ahead of this and be proactive with our solutions.
Our topic today really focuses on water, and more specifically on flooding in the Okanagan. And Tessa, I wanted to start with you. You're a Syilx tribal member, people who've occupied this valley for thousands of years. European settlers' approach to water in the last several hundred years is really as a resource to be controlled and exploited for human benefit. How does this worldview differ from an indigenous worldview?
The two values are so different, but that doesn't mean that they can't work together. The Syilx, as well as indigenous nations across the world, have very similar views of water. Water is, it's life-giving and it's sacred, and I mean, we hear our elders say that all the time. We say that in meetings, but it's so easy just to hear those words and it kind of goes over your head. So unless you have that connection or lived experience, it's really hard to comprehend, well, what does water sacred even mean, or that it is life-giving. Obviously, it provides life to all foods, all other living organisms. And it's important that we don't take a human-centric approach to water or any environment or natural resource management. That's what's been done from predominantly the more Western scientific realm, is really looked at NR or water from more of a subject. So how do we control that for our benefit? How do we make water go around us so it doesn't impact us? And from a Syilx perspective, we don't see water like that. We see water as a living being. It's got spirit, it's got wisdom, it's healing, it's got identity. We're not separated from water. We hear a lot from the woman perspective, the connection of water to birth and life-giving, and the importance, if you're a mother, to have clean, accessible drinking water in your homes. A lot of Indigenous communities don't have access to safe drinking water. A lot of communities are on boil water advisories. Throughout the Okanagan, all the major cities are developed on historical wetlands, and the rivers have been straightened and dammed and diked. So we've really taken away that natural function of the watershed. We're in a very exciting time because salmon will be coming back into Okanagan Lake from being extirpated from the damming of the Columbia River and over commercial fishing in the stateside. So that's been a collaborative initiative between the Syilx Okanagan Nation and various levels of government and NGOs. And that's a perfect example of Syilx knowledge, values, that was led by our elders, and ceremonies were done beforehand. So for us, we can't do restoration or management without that ceremonial practice to lead up. When you get that foundation of TEK and that wisdom and those Syilx water values first to guide the Western science and the best practice, and to think from a systems thinking approach, so everything is connected, and a systems thinking approach I find very similar to a Syilx worldview. So how do we bring in engineering practices with artists or with biologists or ecologists and our elders
Anna, in 2018, you actually, Okanagan Basin Water Board, partnered with the Okanagan Nation Alliance and the University of British Columbia in a big project to digitally map the watershed and really look at floodplain mapping using very sophisticated LiDAR technology. Talk a little bit about the science that went into that, and then why it's so important for us and our understanding of and information as we move forward and look at strategies to mitigate climate change.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting following up on what Tessa said and thinking about being here in this park in 2017 where we're sitting right now was, you know, these benches were covered with water. It really felt like this intense example of how, you know, despite what we think, humans can't control everything. So with climate change, the weather is getting wilder and less predictable. And so we have to work on understanding what we can understand within the limits of the science as it is right now, and figure out how to apply it so that you know, we can protect communities from harm generally, given that we have settled on these floodplains. So the first thing that we did is we got a very generous grant from the province to do three-dimensional imagery of the entire landscape. So this can go down to like 3 centimeters. You can tell every little bump on the ground, and it is of the entire watershed. So that's the LiDAR technology. So we have these 3D images that go throughout the entire valley. And you can imagine how useful a 3D image would be if you were trying to figure out where the water is going to flow. If you know that there's water coming down Mill Creek, where are the outlets? Where are the low points where it could spill out into the neighborhoods? The same thing around here, around the lakeshore. You think, well, you know, what are the most vulnerable spots? So when you're at the point of actual flood response, when the lake is rising uncontrollably, you can come out and figure out where to put your temporary dams and things like that. But from the point of view of the overall understanding what the flood risk is over time and creating a digital flood map, it's also really useful because you could look at different levels. You can digitally game out where different levels of flooding would affect the communities and where things are vulnerable. So the Okanagan did not have a complete set of flood maps. They had never really been done, and the ones that had been done in certain little areas were, you know, a lot of them weren't even digital. They were done with old technology and surveying, and so we were able to combine the LiDAR with some hydrology modeling, looking at how the water flows on the surface of the ground, a lot of sophisticated climate modeling, looking into the future, and some also understanding the hydraulics of the water flowing down the Okanagan River channel, and combine all of this into really a robust 21st century flood map. But it's really kind of staggering if you look at it, at how much risk we really are at. And right now we're in the process of trying to digest it and understand, okay, now we know somewhat what our risks are now, what our risks are going to be mid-century, and what our risks are going to be like 2070.
Yeah.
And understand, how do we build our communities so that we have some resilience to that?
What I was impressed by is that one of the elements is your collaboration together, sort of combining the mashup of technology and traditional ecological knowledge. How is that working out? Has that been a positive collaboration, and do you feel it yields more to the dimensionality and the value of what you're coming up with?
Well, from my point of view, we actually had 2 simultaneous projects going on. I was focusing on the mapping. Tessa's group was leading a flood risk and debris flow assessment. And we were able to exchange data sets and support each other's projects through steering committees and whatnot. But the part that I thought was really valuable for me. Working on the flood mapping project, I was able to attend the steering committee and workshops that the Okanagan Nation Alliance was putting on. So at those meetings we would be hearing from elders and talking about all different sets of values that may not be coming through the strict engineering approach that we're taking with the flood mappings.
Tessa, you had mentioned in your comments sort of the interrelationship and the holistic approach, including not just a focus on the lake, which we tend to do. We think about the lake and the flooding on the lake, but really the causation happening in the entire watershed, particularly up above us, where, you know, when we had intact forests, those forests used to hold water much longer. Can you talk a little bit about maybe, and address to both of you, the utilization of natural assets in our mitigation of and protection and resilience around climate change?
For sure, it's something that our elders have been asking for a long time. From their perspective, we should be starting in the headwaters, restoring those high mountain wetlands. What did they used to look like? And they do recognize that the climate is changing. Some of those, for example, like replants of forest activity, they're not taking or surviving, so they're turning into more like grasslands, for instance. Or different trees are growing where perhaps there was other old growth trees now. But it's important that we do proper management. Prescribed fire is really critical. That was always a Syilx way of looking after the landscape. Our elders always did prescribed fire. We had fire keepers until they were removed from the land and not allowed to do that practice anymore. And now we're finally seeing, like, oh, prescribed fire is the way we gotta go, and our elders are banging their head against the wall, basically. We're like, we've been telling you that,
right,
guy, for a long time, and you stopped us from doing that.
I think I just wanted to say something also about natural assets. I think that in a certain way, and especially in the developed areas, we are our own worst enemy when it comes to flooding, because we have hardscaped the lower portions of the watershed, so that when rain falls on the roofs, when rain falls on the concrete, it flows to the lowest point. And then the lowest point, which, whether it's Mission Creek or Mill Creek or wherever it is in our neighborhoods, that's where it's flooding. If we had let the water slow down, spread out, and sink into the ground in these neighborhoods, we would not be having these flashy flood conditions, which in the developed areas of the city are some of the most intense and extreme examples of it. So places where people are stepping back from the creeks, removing concrete, adding in areas where you can naturally let the water absorb, and whether you call them natural assets or engineered natural assets or rain gardens or whatever you want to call them, and there's a million different names, they are providing that natural function that if we don't give our streams that natural function, they're going to just take it. They're just going to keep overflowing. They're going to flood neighborhoods, and then we're not going to be able to be intentional about moving out of the way because they'll just take the space back.
Sure.
The next step of the mapping project is to identify solutions. The OBWB has partnered with UBCO to look at what kinds of solutions could avert flooding problems.
This research project will help local governments to mitigate flood-related risks.
The principal investigator of the project is UBCO Dean of Engineering, Rehan Sadiq. Dr. Sadiq's focus in his lab is water supply systems, engineered infrastructure, and environmental risk analysis. He and his lab work with municipalities across Canada to solve complex problems just like this one.
Joining us today is project manager and visiting UBCO engineering professor, Dr. KHMD Nahid Uzma, or Nahid as he prefers.
Hello, Nahid. Welcome to the program. Why don't you tell us a bit about your background as it relates to flooding?
Sure, thank you, Camille. I'm an urban planner. My research has been predominantly focused on flood resilience with an account of flood risks and vulnerabilities.
Anna and Tessa have just shared with us the 2 projects they've undertaken to map vulnerabilities in our region. I understand now that they've brought UBCO to the table to look at next steps. Can you describe the project?
Sure. Communities like Kelowna are facing flooding on a regular basis. So creating models based on historical trends and future projections is vital for the decision makers, right? So what we need is a shift in focus from flood protection to an adaptive resilience approach, right? So to have that shift to be in real place, a thoughtful study needs to be conducted that attempts to address floods following a systematic analytical framework, right? So under that framework, the gaps need to be identified.
How would you go about identifying the gaps?
The research will develop risks and vulnerability assessment tools, make future risk projections, and review current decision-making tools, including strategies, guidelines, bylaws currently in place across the Okanagan Valley. So we'll look at the gaps, challenges, successes, and opportunities for improvement, right? We'll also research and report an effective flood policy and planning tools used in other regions of Canada.
What kind of outcomes could we expect from a study like this? New approaches to building, new regulations, land purchases of risky areas, new technologies?
We'll try to identify the ways that multiple levels of government can work together seamlessly.
When does this study wrap up?
We're expecting, the study to be completed by February 2021.
Well, that's very timely, in time for next flood season. That's great.
Absolutely.
I understand that you've also designed a project with the BC Real Estate Association related to flooding.
Sure. Yes, it is currently under review with MyTech's program. The proposed collaboration between BCREA and UBCO aims to develop pathways in enhancing the awareness of flood risk. So local flood vulnerability index, in short, LOVV, would be an important tool for this, which considers the social, economic, and physical vulnerabilities of floods.
What would the outcomes of that project be?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It will be, again, let's say, kind of dynamic dashboard in which each municipality can understand where they stand when it comes to vulnerability. Right now, we don't have much of those dynamism involved, so we try to have the dynamics in place for evaluation.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to move now from the Okanagan Valley as a whole to the city of Kelowna. The city, once again, was hit by flooding in Mill Creek this spring.
To explore how we can deal with that problem, we're going to look at the great work that the City of Kelowna has done with Mission Creek. David Saltman is going to interview Doug Gilchrist, Kelowna City Manager, and Todd Cashin, who's with the Regional District of Central Okanagan. They're going to show how restoration of the area has restored habitats, mitigated flooding, and provides beautiful recreational opportunities for our community.
So one of the things I love about this Mission Creek Restoration Project is that it's an example that some of the municipal needs or citizen needs don't have to compete with environmental needs. They can be one and the same. So back here you've got a little bit of road project, some farming. We have a recreation center really close by. They all benefit from some of these environmental initiatives. And of course the other side is the creek here with salmon spawning, wildlife habitat, birds. It's a real benefit. And just up the road a little bit behind me is First Nation lands as well. So a big part of any project, it requires that kind of consultation.
So Todd, one of the things I've noticed as we've walked the creek is how much new life is coming up all around us. I'm seeing saplings and much more foliage. Is that just part of the restoration project?
Sure, well yeah, I mean one of the most hated tree species in the Okanagan is the cottonwood tree. Right. But it's because it loves water and it loves floodplains, and it has an immense amount of seeds that it puts down every year, as well as the willow. We've got a lot of sandbar willow here So both the willow and the cottonwood they're native, obviously, to floodplains. They love the moisture, like they love the flooding process of layering of the sand and the silt.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. So they're in their heaven. So we create a floodplain like this. We fill it full of water and sediment from time to time, and the cottonwood and the willow come back naturally.
Fantastic. Doug, how do you see the long-term sustainability, both economic as well as environmental, around these projects? How do we kind of keep these kinds of projects going?
Well, these projects can't be a one-off, right? It has to be a sustained effort by all kinds of levels of government, nonprofits, people like the Okanagan Sustainable Leadership Council, to keep these things going. So there needs to be shown an economic benefit of how this can sustain itself, contribute back to the community. Some of the grant funding that's necessary from different levels of government, we're starting to see flow now. Yeah. And that's going to be critical to making sure that these have some longevity to them, for sure.
So we're standing here on a stretch of Mission Creek now that's starting to naturalize with a little bit of help. So off to my left is the brand new dike that was constructed a number of years ago. And this is the location of the old dike right here. And behind me you'll see where that old dike used to be. Here we've got the river now. Instead of just a channelized stretch of river, the river is actually being trained to move back and forth. So instead of a one big channelized river, now we're starting to really mix it up again. You can hear the flow changing. You can see that there's change in the water depth. We've got a bit of habitat cover here for the fish with the logs and the different types of rock features, really sort of mixing up the complexity. It helps with, this floodplain obviously helps in a flooding situation, filters out all the gravel. This here really helps the gravels move around back and forth. It's really great for kokanee spawning.
Doug, on a project of this magnitude and of other projects in the future, how does it really begin, and how do you solicit the kind of momentum that you need for long-term commitment to these kinds of initiatives?
In our city, that's called Imagine Kelowna. That was what our citizens told us over nearly an 18-month period. We went out and chatted with people. We had focus groups. We talked about the ideals that people have today that perhaps are a little different than they had in the past. Mm-hmm. And that sets the stage for everything underneath that. That gives us license to then talk about sustainable environment practices and sustainable building practices, sustainable transportation means, and things like that. So it started there, and then it goes into the council realm. We talk about what council's priorities are, and thankfully, one of them is protect the environment. And then we work on delivering on those priorities, holding ourselves accountable as staff, working with many, many community groups to help deliver that vision through their priorities. And ultimately, those things will end up in policies, practices, bylaws, and then projects like Mission Creek Restoration Project.
What role do you think organizations such as the Okanagan Sustainability Leadership Council and other nonprofits and groups play in this process?
Oh, they're huge. I mean, we know that government practices or government policy only goes so far. So if we put our foot forward and we show leadership in that realm, then we can start to garner the interest and support and energy of all of those other groups to help deliver it. So I think they go hand in glove. It's absolutely necessary. Government only plays one small part of the role.
What is the relationship with these types of projects and the larger Okanagan Valley?
Well, there's some issues in our society today that don't follow jurisdictional boundaries. It really doesn't matter. We have a one city, one water initiative that's about our water systems, but really it's about the entire valley and the water resource protection that's needed for all of us up and down the entire Okanagan Valley.
I think we've finally gotten to the point as a society where there's a recognition that climate change is coming, and I don't think anyone needs to look much further than the smoke that was in our valley or the recent floods and the frequency of those events. How do you see the notion of the utilization of natural ecosystems fitting into the agenda of reducing carbon and preparing for climate change?
Well, I'd say thankfully most municipalities and other levels of government have this on the top of their priority agenda. And I think that's a good leadership message, that it's no longer the debate. We don't have to spend energy on the debate anymore. We can spend the energy on the solutions. And certainly in our region, water is one of our most precious resources that requires the protection of all levels of government and others. Everybody who turns on a tap in the morning or the evening, they have a responsibility, and it's on all of us. And so I think the notion we're in this together is a bit trite, but it's never more important than now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was great. Now let's see an impressive demo of the new City of Kelowna flooding dashboard. We're joining Kevin Trotzik, who's a business systems analyst in the city's Information Services Department.
What you're seeing here is our Emergency Operations Center dashboard that we created to help monitor the current situation of essentially around flooding, creek levels, lake levels, snowpack levels. And it just so happened that the year we did this was 2017, and it was in response to the late snowpack that we got, which, as we're aware, we had a pretty bad flood year in 2017. So we wanted to know just how bad could it get. So we put this all together and we laid it out. And one of the angles that we took was we actually were able to say, let's look at typical years of where the lake gets to, and let's look at this year, and let's try to actually predict out into the future and say, where could this get to? Using that tool, the very first time we did it, we were somewhere within about, I believe it was 10 centimeters of where it got to. So we had some confidence that the system was working. And now going forward, we haven't really had such bad years, but there has been a desire to keep monitoring that, and the area we're looking at has grown over time. So what you're looking at here, this is the main dashboard, and where this is typically seen is if you go into the Emergency Operations Center down at the Fire Hall on Enterprise Road, you will see this up on a gigantic projector. People can access this on their tablets, on their phones, on their personal device, anywhere they have. And it gives you a point-in-time picture for what is the current situation. What you can get is you can get a sense of each of the 4 snowpacks within our area and how much snow is remaining up in those hills to come down. One of the ones that was of interest this year was, how can we show how much snow is still left in the hills and where the lake level is going? So here we have comparisons of the 4 different snowpacks, with the current year represented in the yellow. But one of the really interesting aspects of this isn't so much the rise, but where we were before the rise. So for example, in 2017, what was really informative about this compared to this year is 2017, the water was pretty flat. It was already increasing around March before it took off to historic high levels. Whereas this year, following with the yellow line, we were way more prepared for the water. So the lake was drawn down a lot more before it saw the rise, and we never flooded. So there was good control on that. Really, this is just a map in a way to say north to south, what am I looking at a point in time? And one thing that's really important to gain from this is the dams, which are indicated on this side here. So as you can see, they don't all flow at the same rate. So this dam here at the very bottom, they were slowing down the outflow of water, which was causing Osoyoos Lake to rise, and it essentially slows down the system. So if they're not letting water out in Washington, Okanagan Lake is going to keep increasing. So these are just some of the interesting details we were able to glean with this analytics tool through the use of all of this data from various data sets.
What an impressive technology, and a great platform to add technology to as well.
Absolutely.
Congratulations to the City
Very
of Kelowna.
Now, we're going to move to our forests and join David Jenkins, a board member of the Okanagan Sustainability Leadership Council down in Peachland.
Hello and welcome. My name is David Jenkins. I'm a board member with the Okanagan Sustainability Leadership Council. Today, we're coming from the beautiful forests that are in the Syvex territory surrounding the Okanagan Lake. A healthy ecosystem is only as good as where it starts, and where a healthy eco-water system starts is up here in the headwaters, which is our source of water for this region. This is what a healthy forest looks like. It's lush, it's green, and as I move around here, you can see now starting behind me what our current forestry practices are doing to the headwaters area. This is a clear-cut area, and folks, this area is already 7 years old, and it is only just starting to show some regrowth. A few moments ago, we were in an area of clear-cut that is 7 years old. Behind me is an area of clear-cut that is only 7 weeks old. Look at that devastation.
That was powerful, David. Thank you very much. Now we're going to turn the discussion over to Taryn Scalbania. She's a co-founder of the Peachland Watershed Alliance. Taryn is going to interview Professor Jonas Alila, who is a forestry professor with UBC's Vancouver campus. Then she's going to interview Herb Hammond, who is a professional forester and forest ecologist.
And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your interest in forest resource management and forest operations. Can you just speak to me a little bit about the science that you work on?
I joined the University of British Columbia and the Faculty of Forestry here in Vancouver campus in 1996. I've been doing research and teaching in the field of hydrology in general, but particularly forest hydrology. I recall before the mountain pine beetle infestation, the total amount of logged area in any drainage is capped to about 25%. Now we are seeing watershed being logged as we speak to a total area of 50 and 60 and 70% and even more. Only in recent years that research has been published on the effect of large cut rates in large watersheds that started being published recently, only recently, is that before we've never done this. We've never logged high with such a high cut rate. This is all new. And therefore, some of us scientists are having to actually design experiment and design research project to suddenly investigate the effects of these high logging rate in medium and large catchments. And the outcome of these recent studies are really dramatic. Comes to how sensitive the flood regime in particular is to actually ease to these high logging rates. The effect of logging is significant operationally. It affects downstream community and their livelihood and their businesses and their homes, etc.
And I'm speaking with Herb Hammond, professional forester of the Silva Forest Foundation. And where are you coming from, Herb?
I live in the Slocan Valley, which is unceded territory of the Sinites, Tanaha, and Okanagan.
Peachland is, and I'm sure other watersheds in the Okanagan, is an example of a multi-use watershed overused. It's I've been told by others we're a poster child for an unhealthy or a non-resilient watershed with all the different uses.
Clear cutting removes that canopy that I talked about. People drive around with heavy machinery and break up fallen trees. So you no longer have the water storage and filtration system. They expose wetlands, which are another natural water storage and filtration system, so they dry and no longer function like they should. The winter snow, you get about 30% deeper snowpacks. Why do you get 30% deeper snowpacks than under a forest canopy? Because the forest canopy, remember I mentioned, intercepts that precipitation. Same thing with snow. And about 30% of it gets evaporated or sublimated, moving from a solid to a gas. That phenomenon is what's responsible for moving water that originates in our headland temperate rainforests from Vancouver Island and up and down the coast, across BC, across the Rocky Mountains into the prairies. So that phenomenon leapfrogs water and is responsible for good water relations across continents. When you clear cut an area, that water doesn't get moved around. It stays there. So you have a snowpack that's 30% deeper because it hasn't, you don't have a canopy there to protect or to sublimate it or evaporate it and move it across the landscape. And so you have deep snowpacks, but when the sun starts shining and it gets hot, they melt 30 or 40% faster. So what happens is in the spring, you have floods and erosion and landslides and things that are triggered by this this out of balance timing of flow. So you have floods and all kinds of problems that go with floods, and then in the fall, you suddenly have droughts, and the water that you needed to slowly meter out is gone. It's all run off. So you end up creating problems with all three of those water variables, quality, quantity, and timing of flow, by practicing the kind of industrial forestry that's happened in the Peachland watershed.
The water that's created in the prairies actually started on the coast, and BC's forests are responsible for transmitting it there. So it's something that people don't think of when we cut down those forests. What would you suggest to communities along Lake Okanagan that feel that their watersheds may not be as resilient as they used to be?
The trees are not disposable parts of ecosystems. We seem to have gotten in our heads that we can clear cut and plant trees because when we take those big old trees out of there, they really weren't needed anyway. And I would suggest that in my own experience over the decades of working with loggers, when I have shown loggers how to practice ecosystem-based forestry, where we leave full cycle trees, at least 25 or 30% of the trees stay forever on that site. They become snags, fall down, become fallen trees, and store and filter water. I have never encountered a situation where a person made that switch to that kind of forestry and went back to clear cutting.
In your past projects that you've been working on, and when you've worked with First Nations communities in forestry plans and applying them, how did you use the Western science that you were taught and marry it with the traditional ecological knowledge from the First Nations?
What I discovered there was something quite amazing. All of this lack of comfort that I was feeling with science, which provides a lot of good information too, was for a very real reason, and that's that I was trying to fit my belief system into the dominant society's belief system that I didn't agree with. and when I started working with Indigenous people, I found a belief system where the land comes first, the land and the water, where as my friend, an Indigenous friend, Dennis Martinez, has coined the word kincentric, which means that kincentric relationships mean that we're all related to each other, the rocks, the minerals, the people, the birds. And as he points out, in that situation, it's impossible to think of the world as natural resources in a kincentric relationship, because you have to take care of, you have to provide reciprocity for all those beings. And how in the world could you simply label them as natural resources? You can't. Indigenous knowledge does something science can't. It sees whole pictures. Science takes things apart to test one or two variables against each other to see what kind of an effect is happening. And in some cases, that's a useful way to solve problems. In watersheds, it's not a very useful way to solve problems, because watersheds are a very messy thing. They're full of all kinds of variables, interconnected processes, parts that are all working together. And so when you start changing them, even though you don't see that change right away, you degraded it to some level. And in the Peachland watershed, there's been so many degradations that now, to me, it's just kind of overwhelming how much of a problem it's caused. So if you stepped back and applied an indigenous way of being and indigenous knowledge to how to take care of that watershed, people would have stopped long ago doing the things that are being done there. And so there's some really important lessons there.
Thank you, Herb. The time is for changes now. We've become a cohesive community, and thank you for giving us some of that information.
You're welcome.
To wrap up the show on an inspirational note, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues, Sarah Sutherland and Paul Matthews.
Hi, I'm Paul Matthews, partner with the law firm of Lawson Lundell here in Kelowna.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sutherland and I'm the Program Manager at Entrepreneurship at UBCO. We are delighted to introduce to you 2 award-winning UBCO ventures today.
These 2 teams recently won the Aqua Hacking Challenge hosted by the Okanagan Basin Water Board.
And one of their prizes was a spot in our Entrepreneurship at UBCO program, which includes one-on-one mentoring with one of 30 business leaders who are volunteering their time to help coach our ventures. Our program also includes a suite of over 30 educational vodcasts, which include every aspect of starting a business, as well as live cases, exercises, and a quick pitch competition. We are grateful to have the support of our founding sponsors, Lawson Lundell and M&P, without whom this program wouldn't be possible.
Thanks, Sarah. As a mentor and sponsor in the program, I'm really excited about getting these teams and their technologies launched into the marketplace. We're going to wind up the program by looking at their winning pitches from the Aqua Hacking Challenge. Let's start with Elite A to Z.
I want to introduce you my lovely team and passionate individuals to you guys. We have Javier, we have Gavin, we have Ahmed, and myself, Keevan. We are graduates of Civil Engineering Technology from Okanagan College and currently pursuing our degree at UBCO in Civil Engineering as well. Well, in January 2020, AquaHack introduced us to the challenge and we started to do some investigation. We found out that a lot of hydrocarbons and oils from vehicles are leaking and finding their way to a catch basin and our stormwater and ending up in our lakes and streams. Interior Health released a report recently that if the proper measures are not taken right now to basically preserving our water sources right now, in the future, it's going to cost us more to upgrade our systems in order to make them potable. So as a matter of fact, Vernon would cost, which is the north of Okanagan Lake, would cost almost $400 million to have that system upgraded. And you might ask, okay, like tourism, and it's one of the attraction point of Okanagan. They're not really involved directly. Well, out of the $1.25 billion of GDP that generated from Okanagan area, $620 million of it is from tourism. So I don't think that tourists would like to be spending time at the dirty beaches or like restaurants or like orchards or the vineyards that are like around the contaminated lake. We start to do research. What is actually available for? What kind of media is available for filtration system actually? And yes, activated carbon, graphite, they are available, but there's a carbon footprint involved with them, and they're very expensive. And believe it or not, actually, human hair has that adsorption capacity. So absorption is for sponge. Sponge grabs all the chemical and contaminants and water inside of it, but adsorption, which allows the water go through, but contaminants will stick to the media. Hair has more adsorption capacity than activated carbon. So NASA actually has done extensive research about it. They have tested it for reusability and recycling it, and it has been used for oil spills. And after its life cycle is done, it actually could be used for oyster mushroom farms, which is a commodity, and also we have abundant amount of it available. As a matter of fact, in Okanagan, Tommy Gunn's Barbershop has partnered up with us to provide the raw material for us. They have 4 branches here. They have 71 branches across Canada. And for sanitizer purpose of it, we just need a UV treatment of it. The design of our kidney, inspired by that, we established our prototype in March 2020. We start testing it, and we had an objective for it. We wanted to maximize our filtration of hydrocarbons, maximize efficiency, minimize turbidity, and minimize maintenance. Each one of the cartridges looked like this, replaceable like a printer. We sent our tests to Caro Analytical. They're a very accreditable lab in Kelowna. They started testing our water before and after, turbidity reduced, hydrocarbons reduced, and we have before and after picture. As a matter of fact, I told the team, I would definitely swim in the water and in the right bucket. I wouldn't really swim in the left one. Now we know what we have. So definitely we have to look at who are our clients. So municipalities, obviously, they're interested in this product. Based on the needs, we started to design 3 different products, different sizes for municipal, commercial, and residential. And we wanted to make the sizes feasible and our pricing competitive. Our liability is not even to ourselves. It is also to the generation to come. And if you don't act quickly, we will face the consequences of our action in short term and long term. So by investing in A to Z filter, which uses a renewable and environmentally friendly filtration media, you are going to be the shareholders of a sustainable and innovative enterprise.
That was great, don't you think?
Oh, it was. And let's wrap it up with GAPS. Go GAPS!
Go GAPS!
My name is Jacob, and my teammates and I have formed Gravity-Assisted Particle Separation Systems. We're a group of first-year engineers that have created a team driven to protect our water. I want you to take a look at this image. This is Kelowna, a beautiful city, no doubt, and the water is a huge contribution to that. But for those of you who live here, or are at least familiar with the Okanagan lifestyle, you know that it is more than just about beauty. The water supports life, it drives our economy, and it ultimately brings people together. But this reality is slipping away. With increasing infrastructure, more and more contaminated stormwater runoff is making its way into our sacred lakes. If we don't intervene now, our lakes could be forever changed for the worse. I'd like to hand it over to Rudy to further explain.
So how did we get here? Naturally, stormwater from rainfall should soak into the ground where it joins aquifers. However, due to urbanization, the landscape of our cities has changed, and the introduction of impervious surfaces like concrete and asphalt have made it so that stormwater now flows through our streets where it collects contaminants before entering catchment basins and ultimately converging to central water bodies such as the Okanagan Lake in Kelowna, BC. Now, hydrocarbons are a pretty obvious contaminant. However, sediment is often overlooked. Sediment is problematic for 2 main reasons. Firstly, sediment increases the cloudiness or turbidity of the water. This is bad for photosynthetic species which depend on sunlight to produce food, and thereby any other species which depend on them. Secondly, sediment acts as a transporter for other contaminants such as biochemicals and heavy metals that have a tendency to bind onto them. Moreover, the lack of data regarding stormwater contamination makes informed decision-making currently impossible. If we continue to let this problem run without intervention, we will see declining appeal of our beautiful BC water bodies, increased human contact with contaminants in recreational lakes, and degrading aquatic ecosystems. Ultimately, taxpayer funding will be required for cleanup efforts. We present to you our solution, GAPS, a simple product that slides seamlessly into existing catchment basins. GAPS performs 3 main functions. Firstly, it directly removes hydrocarbons from stormwater. Secondly, it directly removes sediment from stormwater and thereby is able to remove any sediment-mobilized contaminants. Thirdly, it records real-time data regarding turbidity and water flow rate through built-in sensors. Now we'd like to show you a demonstration. On the right-hand side, you can see the control. This is our current infrastructure without GAPS installed. On the left-hand side, you have a version with GAPS installed. We poured the same high turbidity water through both cases, and let's take a look at the results. This is the water that flowed out of our control without GAPS installed. And this is the water that flowed with GAPS installed. A remarkable difference indeed. As social entrepreneurs, we strive to do the best for our society. And through GAPS, we'll be able to deliver 50 to 80% cleaner water into our central water bodies. We'll be able to remove the contaminants as early as possible in the cycle. Because sediment transports other contaminants, removing sediment as early as possible has a compound effect. GAPS is affordable, which means it's accessible for all municipalities, not just the big ones. Therefore, we'll be able to maintain our pristine water bodies province-wide that drive our tourism-driven economy. Our solution is unique. Firstly, it's simple. There's no moving parts, very easy installation, and most importantly, it can be retrofitted into existing city infrastructure. GAPS is affordable at only 10% the cost of our competitors, while still being effective as it removes 80% of sediment and up to 90% of hydrocarbons. I'd like to hand it over to Cole now.
In 2013, Kelowna's annual budget for stormwater management was $85 million.
In 2020, BC's budget for environmental protection was $250 million. Our competition consists of hydrodynamic separators, porous pavement, and storm drain filters. Hydrodynamic separators, such as the storm scepter shown on the right here, are expensive and extremely disruptive to install. Porous pavement also requires a modification of existing infrastructure, making it infeasible to implement in a city system. Storm drain filters have a tendency to overflow and have a limited capacity. Our solution does not have a limiting capacity and does not require the modification of existing infrastructure.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you at our next program in February, where we focus on food resiliency. I know we've all become much more conscious of that issue in this challenging time. Until then, thank you and good evening.
Thanks, everyone.